Okay, so welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. This is episode 11. So tonight we have a lot of people here. We have Art, as always. Afra is back temporarily. Heather is here, Chuck, and we have a new guest, our friend Mark. Some of you may know him from the Political Paradigm Shift. So Mark's going to introduce himself real quick, and then he's going to get right into our topic. And our topic tonight is something that we all know something about. It's online debate. What are some good techniques? What aren't some good techniques? What are some stuff that really piss us off? And what are some stuff that we think works really well? So, Mark, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself, kind of briefly say maybe what your political affiliation is, and then anything else you want to say about yourself, feel free. I wouldn't get too personal.
Darn, that was going to be my strategy. It's just overshare right from the beginning. So I'm Mark. I am generally left-leaning, I would say, and certainly not as far left as to call myself progressive, but definitely kind of a traditional Northeastern college boy liberal. I majored in philosophy, which makes me pretty well qualified to argue on the internet and perhaps not much else. But I enjoy it. I do it basically for three reasons, two of which are selfish. It's a more interesting hobby than collecting stamps or coins, so I just do it for entertainment. It helps me kind of clarify and sharpen my own positions, and this is probably the most useful part of it. I don't think I convince a lot of people online. I don't think very many people convince a lot of people online, but it does help me crystallize my own positions. And then the third reason is the Batman reason, justice. I just can't leave bad arguments and racism and, misinterpretations of data just sitting on the internet without commenting. You've all seen the guy late at night typing on his computer saying, I can't come to bed yet, somebody's wrong on the internet. Well, that's how I feel about it. I can't let those things go uncommented on. So I don't think it particularly is persuasive to yell at people online, but that's what I do anyway. So that's my kind of initial blush at online debating.
Okay. That's interesting. I have this theory that over time you can influence people's beliefs, but it takes a really long time and it's not necessarily noticeable.
The Overton window theory, where you just like slightly shift the conversation, to one way where it's slightly less acceptable to say, racist things and slightly more acceptable to that kind of thing.
Sort of like that, but on an individual basis and not. So Afra, I know you don't have a whole lot of time here, so I was wondering if you wanted to chime in. I think the other day you had some interesting things to say about how the deterioration, or maybe not the deterioration, but how your sort of dissatisfaction with the way that online debating is happening nowadays. So if you want to clarify that.
First, I'm just going to follow up on what Mark said. I think, I probably do it for selfish reasons too, and not always because I can't leave someone being wrong, because I've kind of learned how to do that. It's a lot, but I teach my students now online comments, like where I tell them, to imagine they're going to leave a comment on the New York Times or Yahoo or something like that. And I kind of frame the discussion like, there are so many assholes online that if you can just go out there and not be the asshole, you might actually reach some people, and it's a really good experience. And to not be the asshole, you got to read what people say. You have to take them at their word, not read things into it, and respond to that with something at least that seems like earnestness or intellectual honesty. So for your question, Nick, what I was talking about was this new kind of, it's not really new, but it's really, really taken hold, I think, on Facebook and Twitter right now, what I was calling the say you love crepes style of debate. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Talladega Nights. Did you ever see that? The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, right? So the one race car driver, I'm pretty sure it's from that movie, is threatening to break his arm. He's got like his arm behind him, and he says, "Say you love crepes," right? Like, and all he wants is the guy to say it, and he won't say it. He'll get his arm broken rather than saying, "I love crepes." He doesn't even know what a crepe is. So what we've got now is like this sort of outgrowth from when Obama was given a whole bunch of shit for not saying radical Islamic terrorism, right? And then a similar thing happened with Trump. I would say similar because there are some significant differences with why won't you denounce the KKK, right? And he would never want to really say, I denounce the KKK, but he'll say, well, of course, like racism is bad. But what people wanted him to say was that thing. And a lot of people think that that's like, you need to start a conversation where you denounce left-wing violence and I denounce right-wing violence. But the problem is that nobody wants to start a conversation that way because it's really just like the end of the conversation. And it's a gotcha, it's a win where you feel like you're in a win, and you can't just like talk to people about all this confluence of circumstances that are causing it, and somebody wants you to say I love crepes and you don't want to say you love crepes, and then this is like the argument over and over and over again. So for me, that is like basically chasing me away from having any kind of discussion, because as soon as you bring something up, it's whataboutism, and you have to deal with that. You know, you want to mention something, you want to broaden the spectrum of what people are talking about, and you're kind of, you know, given that, no, you can't. You have to say radical Islamic terrorism. Say it, or this conversation is over.
Didn't Bill Clinton have to kind of deal with that? And he did it with that Sister Souljah moment, right? Where you denounce somebody who is ostensibly on your team in order to get credibility with the other side. Now, I don't know whether that worked well or not, but that's definitely, was his strategy, I guess.
It worked really well, and that's why we still talk about it.
Yeah.
Clinton was very good at that, yeah.
So, just briefly, Afra, what do you think, what is an ideal debate like? I mean, if you could change how people are framing these debates or discussions, what would you like to see?
I would like to see, if it's about this issue of violence and protests, I would like to see just talk about the entire spectrum of the situation. What's happening? Who's there? What are the various provocations? What are the various agendas and things like that? And allow for a sort of expansive discussion. I don't really think that we have debates on Facebook. I mean, I'm one of the few people who don't really even call it that. They're not even discussions. They're just kind of like, people seeking out. I see a lot of, I'm going to be the very negative person here because I'm going to leave soon and then you can jump off with that. They're seeking out their frenemies or the people that they disagree with, just waiting for Chuck to comment on something and be like, Chuck is the worst, I'm like, and you're the worst because here's all the stuff I think that you think that I don't really know whether you think it. And so there are these sort of, there's something kind of incestuous about it where everybody knows each other, everybody's related to somebody in some way, and they're all like just like fighting with each other. And I don't really think that that's a debate, but ideally it would be more like these podcasts where everybody would be able to come in with their particular angle. Hey, I happen to know something about this, without being told, no, we're not even going to talk about that until you denounce, I don't know, whoever tweeted something earlier today. And that seems to me, maybe you're not seeing it as much as I am, but it seems to me it's something that is slowly taking over almost all of these debates, is this impulse to get you to immediately capitulate to something. And if you won't immediately capitulate to whatever that thing is, then it's just a war.
But can't you kind of flip that around? And if the person isn't willing to sort of discuss the other side of the issue, right, doesn't that sort of make it hard to have this sort of discussion that you're talking about? Like, in other words, you're saying that you don't think that we should force people into having to say specific things, right? But if they're not even considering those things, and it's really difficult to have that sort of discussion anyway.
Why is there an expectation that they consider those things before you even have had the discussion, right? Like, consider my position. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but here's the conclusion, right? The conclusion is that you should denounce X, Y, Z, or you should take. So this is what I'm saying is this is not, and very inarticulately because I've been lecturing all day. This is not a starting place for discussion. Immediately agree with a proposition is not a starting place for discussion. I guess it can be if everybody knows that that's what's coming and that's how it's going to work. But it's if you want me to say something, you won't begin to have a conversation with me until I say I denounce violence in all its forms or something. Then you don't feel like you have to back up anything that you're saying. You not explain to me why I'm saying that. It seems like you're just, it's the toll, right, to go over the bridge. It's the price of doing business, but why, right? And I don't think that that's a good place to put someone in. And also, you can start a conversation like that, and it will happen, and I will say, I denounce violence in all its forms, and then a few minutes down the road, I might say, here is a situation where this became, just a conflagration, and it's nobody's particular fault. And then it's like, gotcha, you denounce violence in all its forms, but now you're apologizing for it. It's a mess. It's a messy way. I will hold that position to start any kind of discussion because it actually just shuts down discussion.
You know what real debates have that Facebook doesn't? Somebody in charge, right? Somebody in a moderation. Now, I don't mean like moderating because somebody posted a picture of poop or something and you ban them. I mean moderating in terms of, trying to regulate the flow of discussion, and Facebook is a really terrible vehicle for that.
Well, so much of what we do in these political groups is to respond to particular events. Somebody makes a post about, what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin today, and everyone is supposed to weigh in. Oh, that's terrible. Well, that's justified. No, that's terrible. No, that's justified. And I know what you're saying, Afra, about not being able to get some of the nuances that are inevitably part of any complex issue. You're not going to go back and get the complete background story on this entire movement just by saying that's terrible to a story from Kenosha, Wisconsin. But that's the impetus for most of what we talk about in these Facebook groups. Somebody makes a post about an event or somebody's nasty tweet or somebody's a viral video, and we respond to it. One of the things, and I'll get back to what Mark said at the beginning here about the whole idea of why we do this, why we pollute our brains by hanging around these Facebook groups like we do. For me, it was much like with Mark. I mean, to me, this is like intellectual calisthenics. It helps me sharpen my own view when I hear someone with a differing view. I was on Facebook for about 3 or 4 years, and I kind of gravitated, like most people do, towards, like-minded people and whatnot. There's very few like-minded people sometimes where I'm concerned, but I'm weird that way. But yeah, after a few years, I said, well, this is not doing me any good. I need to actively seek out groups of people that disagree with me. Now, the problem is, if you do that on Facebook, whether you're looking for left people or right people, if they're too far away from the center, then it's going to be nothing more than an old AOL flame war. And that's not why I'm here. I mean, I'm here to be, to debate, to talk. I've never had my mind changed, but I've had my stance softened on a lot of things talking on Facebook. I guess I've been on for about 10 years now. I think that's what the notification said a while back. So yeah, over the course of 10 years, hopefully you'll learn a little bit something. Hopefully we're all fucking smarter than we were 10 years ago. That would be a good thing. Boy, it'd be terrible if we were at the same intelligence level. But as far as PPS is concerned, that's one of the groups I actively sought out because it had, just in totality was a little bit to the left. And after going through and blocking an awful lot of people, because there are a lot of people that are not there to debate. They just want to agitate. I'm too fucking old for that. I have zero patience. I'll tell you this. I thought as I got older, I would be like the elderly people when I was growing up who would look at somebody flat fucking stupid and say, oh, bless his heart. He doesn't know any better. He means well. He's a good boy. No, I figured that would happen to me as I got older. I would be very forgiving. The opposite has happened. I've gotten less patient, less tolerant of just rank stupidity and people who simply want to provoke rather than talk, rather than debate. So yeah, I guarantee you, my block list is longer than all y'all's put together just because I have no patience. If somebody's going to be a fucking troll, I don't want to hear from you.
I agree with that. Like if somebody's trying to just troll you, that's fine. But I don't see anything wrong with if somebody posts something on like the Wisconsin shooter or something else, right? Where they're saying he was justified, yada, yada, yada. And my response to that is something along the lines of, well, have you considered the way that African Americans have been treated in this country? That's not necessarily like me saying you need to do this right now.
Right.
That's me offering, and Afra's not here to defend her position. Whatever.
Is criticism trolling though? I mean, I think of trolling more just doing something just to get a reaction, right? You're
Yeah,
gonna say
that's trolling. I'm not talking about honest to God criticism.
Yeah. I don't. No.
That's why I actively seek out groups of people that disagree with me.
So speaking of being old and learning things, I don't know if any of you guys were ever on MySpace, may it rest in peace.
Yeah.
But they had political forums as well. And talking about learning stuff, I mean, I know now more than I ever wanted to about civil engineering of buildings and metallurgy and rocket fuel and whatever the hell else, just because I was debating 9/11 truthers seemed like most of my life. So if nothing else, I got that out of it.
Good for you.
Speaking of 9/11 truthers, Art. I'm just kidding.
Jet
So-
fuel won't melt dank memes.
That's right. I just remember you saying that a million times when I was in the pit.
Oh, right.
Oh my gosh.
So what's your position here? You love debating online.
I do, and I look at it a little bit differently. If you think about a traditional debate where you would have, two teams or positions, and they would make a point and counterpoint, and there's a bit of a kind of like the Marquis de Queensberry, medieval combat rules, as far as like everyone would get up in the morning and you'd start fighting at 9 a.m. and then you take a break for lunch and all that, and it was a very organized kind of affair, which later gave way to more Napoleonic, like total war tactics and all that. So there's been an evolution since we got the ability to, get online with our 1200 baud modems and argue about stuff. And then, as it's become more advanced, what we would consider formal debate is broken down. But we're seeing, I think, a more evolved, practical mass movement as far as like how information is, disseminated and shaped out there. Most people have their opinions assigned to them. They trust certain news sources. They see people who are kind of arbiters of, what our team believes. And you could even look upon conservatism or, the left or what have you, and go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and see that things have drastically changed. You think about what a standard liberal is right now. Obama and Hillary weren't even for gay marriage 10 years ago. And now it's like, if you're not for trans rights and you're on the left, they're just like, beat it, turf, like get out.
Cancel.
So you're done. So there's a huge, I think, acceleration of how culture has changed depending on what team you assign yourself to. And even like just talking about transgender stuff, there's a period where you would say transgendered, like a person would be transgendered, which fell into favor, then fell out of favor because then that was seen as dismissive. But there's these huge arguments that are taking place within parts of our culture that normally would take generations to kind of seep through. And now we're having it in like real time. And if you don't stay with it, again, like what I was talking about, like a turf, when you consider like a classical feminist, like a J.K. Rowling type, is out. So I think when we talk about online debate, it's kind of at the vanguard of, what, very online people talk about, like how the right looks at politics, how the left looks at politics. And so you have, on one hand, have this, what you guys were talking about earlier as far as, people who are either trolling or there to agitate or what have you. But a lot of that is just, kind of enforcing your team's standards and showing the flag. You rally, you get your troops to rally behind you, it motivates them, and they're really there because they want to be part of the team, not necessarily because they're there for debate. They're there to get fired up, and they're there to win. So people have different reasons for wanting to come on. I personally look at it a little bit differently because I think that you don't beat anybody in a debate. I think that if you debate someone to change their personal opinion, that you're absolutely wasting your time because it won't happen. And even if you change their mind, they won't admit it. So if you're looking for that kind of sense of joy of, yes, I had a great argument and they believed me and I sold them. And now they respect me as a superior intellect. You're wasting your time. It's absolutely never going to happen. But if you think of yourself as playing to an audience where everyone's watching to see how you two compete, there's a lot of people who are kind of on the fence and they maybe associate one way or associate the other, or they're kind of getting tired of their team, or they're a little bit lukewarm on their own team. You can fire them up. You can bring them over to your side, and with good enough arguments, you can use the other person you're arguing with as kind of a foil, as a, kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, who's, just, basically looking stupid, but, helping your team look good. So I love finding people to argue with who I think don't make their points well. Not because I'm ever going to beat them, because stupid people are just going to dig in. Even smart people will dig in. There's no point to try to get them to change, but you can use them to flesh out your own arguments. So I think that an evolution of what we would consider debate shouldn't be to beat your opponent. It should be to identify who in the audience can be pulled over to your side and kind of grow your sphere of influence by presenting good arguments and I think winning the culture war passively rather than actively. It's not like, combat where someone's going to surrender. It's a different kind of campaign. So
I think
How much of it do you think is image crafting, where really what you want to do is look smart to other people?
I think that that's a prerequisite to being persuasive. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's my main goal. I should have said that right from the beginning.
Those are all A personalities right there.
I just want people to love me and think I'm smart. That's really it.
Well, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of that where even if nobody acknowledges it, you look smart and you kind of know that, well, they thought that was a good argument. That even if they don't admit it, I think I look pretty good there. So, I mean, certainly there's an element of that, but I don't even necessarily think it's an A personality thing. And I say that because it's the people that really want to be like heard and kind of dominate and win an argument that don't do well at this. And I think that if you approach it from more of a, trying to expand your sphere of influence rather than try to locate an opponent and target them and destroy them and then have them put their hands up and surrender, those type of people don't debate very well. Like they tend to get angry and they tend to, start yelling or block or whatever. Whereas if you look at more of like just maneuvering for advantage and trying to find high ground, and you think of it more of like this big logistical battle where you have these different lines of argument and you're like, well, that didn't work well, let's move resources out of there and try and build that up. If you have more of a, I guess, strategic approach to how you talk to people and how you debate, you'll, I think, be more persuasive. And if you just want to target someone and scream at them until they submit, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
I actually,
Excellent analysis. Go ahead.
hey,
Emma.
Nick, your microphone's super low, just so you know.
Really?
Yeah,
What about now?
a little bit better.
Not much.
Has it been
Tiny,
this low
tiny
the whole
bit.
time?
Actually, no, I just noticed it. I wanted to
Your
say
mic
that,
become disconnected and we're listening to your condenser mic now.
yeah, listen to Chuck. I think he's right.
What about now?
No.
Terrible.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was just going to expound upon the fact that knowing your audience is really important when you're making an argument. For instance, when you're in college and you're learning how to write all of those essays and those persuasive arguments, you have to know the audience. And I think that what happens a lot of the times in these groups on Facebook or on Twitter is that we have our sides, and each side sort of has like this way of thinking about things with these predisposed biases, and this side has their own side and way of thinking about things. And so someone from this side trying to influence someone from this side is going to speak about things from their perspective, from their way of seeing it, as opposed to trying to speak to the audience that they're speaking to. And I think a lot of the times that's where the disconnect comes from, because not our base value systems, but there's definitely a different set of values and things that we think should be more prominent than others on either side of the political spectrum there. And I think that's a lot of the breakdown. So since everybody else divulged their reason for liking to be on Facebook. I'm not sure I know anymore, to be quite honest. I'm quite fed up with the nonsense, mostly just the disinformation and the lies that are out there. It is so thick right now. It's like banging my head against a wall. Like, I don't feel like I'm just debating, you know, normal things anymore. I'm debating facts, and then I hear something that's not a fact, and then I'll say, okay, well, this is the actual fact and this is why. And I don't know, there's just like this deadness. I think what's so frustrating about it to me is that there's no when they're arguing with you, there's no data-filled articles that they're sharing. They're opinion pieces. There's no peer-reviewed journals or you know, studies that have been done that they're using to support their side of the argument with things. It's just some YouTube vlogger who has this idea and it sounds logical, and hey, I remember hearing about this from this other person and I'm putting two and two together, and so this must be it. And everybody else believes with me, which is what the bandwagon fallacy. So everybody just kind of gets together and believes things, and it just irks me to no end that if you're going to have an honest debate, you have to know what the fuck you're talking about. You had to have read books. You had to be referencing professionals and fields that have been in that field of study for years. You have to be referencing news articles from journalists who are on the ground or from the horse's mouth and not edited. Like, I think for me, that's like the biggest issue I'm having with people in these groups.
Well, does that define the Trump era? Is the death of expertise and, you know, real sources?
Yeah. That's the other thing that happens with the internet. Nick, I still don't think we can hear you very well. I see
What
you
about
trying
now?
to talk.
That's
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Better.
That's better.
It's a little bit better, but it looks like you're having to lean towards your condenser mic.
I am. Yeah.
The good news is you don't
Okay.
appear to be losing your hair. So
I have
Thank
great
you. Good there.
hair. I have great hair.
you're solid.
Thanks, buddy.
Ah.
So am I I'm still low though?
No, you're
No,
good.
this is much better.
Okay.
It's good.
Yeah.
You're good.
So I was just going to say, Heather, a lot of that, I just don't want you to get too discouraged because I think you're one of the better people online. And I enjoy as much as I disagree with you on a whole host of issues, I enjoy discussing things with you because of your approach. You're not trollish at all. You discuss things really well. You're intelligent, and you listen, right? You're in the conversation to have a conversation and not to
Right,
gotcha
because I
everybody.
agree.
Right.
That point is that what you were there, you're not there to teach everybody else as much as you're there to learn for yourself. So
Yes. And so I think that one of the problems is that you've been debating a lot of ridiculous people. And so when you debate the MAGA people, right, it can be demoralizing. They're ridiculous. They don't have they're not rational people, is what it comes down to. And
Who has suspended reason? That's the thing. I mean, you cannot reason with someone who has rejected reason.
Right.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
And evidence, right? Because if you cite something, then okay, that's fake news or that's a biased source. Nothing counts as evidence against their theory, and everything counts as evidence for their theory. So it's possible to debate those people.
Well,
right.
And we've seen it from all. I mean, now you mentioned, the MAGAs, which is the most conspicuous example now. And there were some, Obama supporters from 08 to 2016 who would, launch into a diatribe if you even asked an innocent question about policy positions, call you a racist or whatever. But yeah, there are people that just have renounced any pretense of wanting to learn, to wanting to exchange ideas. It's not always facts that we're debating. It's opinions. You don't have to cite a scientific study to have an opinion on something. I mean, we all look at things through the filter of our experiences, our intellect, juxtaposed against our very soul. And we each have a unique way of interpreting things. And, sometimes there are some arguments that obviously lend themselves to facts that can be quantified and verified, some that cannot. But if someone is going in, and unfortunately in a lot of these debate groups, we know this, there are people that, just simply want to cheer, to denigrate, or to agitate. And the good news is you can find them quickly and you can block them quickly.
But isn't there a hierarchy?
Like, take it from me.
Don't facts and science trump opinions, though? I mean, isn't there a hierarchy there?
So actually,
But
no.
but if we're not, that depends upon what the debate subject is. If we're debating scientific facts, then yeah, facts are facts. If we're debating interpretation of what does this all mean or whatever, then sometimes the facts, and you know this as well as I do, facts there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, the three greatest lies in the world. And people, unfortunately, have made handsome careers out of taking facts and figures and turning them, twisting them to their advantage. So you even with so-called facts, you have to be careful. But yeah, if we're in a debate about specifically the facts, then yeah, you share the link and here's what we're talking about here.
Chuck, that's called the Texas sharpshooter, when you take something that is factual, but you're using it to prove your bias.
Sure, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been reading, haven't you?
Dude, I got a list.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Art was trying to say something, though. What were you going to say, Art?
Okay, just a quick quote from 1984 was that news articles and books are rewritten by the Ministry of Truth. And the exact sciences are endangered as soon as their military necessity ends. And without going into the whole passage of it, the basic point is that humans aren't reason-based, we're advantage-based. So we act in ways that we think will further our interests personally, and that can extend to like socially, collectively, all that. So there are some times where reason matters. And in like Orwell's section of that book, he's basically talking about there are still places where the truth absolutely still mattered. If you're building a jet fighter, you can't have the Ministry of Truth come in and rewrite the science book. Like you actually do need to be able to field like, combat aircraft that are like airworthy. So there are certain aspects where military necessity, like the actual practical realities of things, that is where the advantage lies. But it's a mistake to think that humans operate that in a social manner the same way. I mean, you could become an adherent to a religion you don't believe in because you think it's going to get you chicks and money, and you like chicks and money, and you don't care that the religion's maybe like not real. So, or maybe you're not sure, but you're willing to kind of blow that off. There's all kinds of ways where your interests as a carbon-based life form, to go old Star Trek on you. You have certain biological realities that you have to adhere to, where to get what you want, you might not necessarily see the fastest path to there as the most rational and mathematical. It could actually be kind of irrational and crazy, but or at least willing to suspend disbelief. You could be with for instance, like a partner who has crazy beliefs and you really, really like her. So you put up with all kinds of crazy stuff from her that your friends are like, why are you doing this? Why are you putting up with her crap? And it's because, so people will do all kinds of stupid stuff in a society where you're not actually getting the most rational decision-making, you're getting the most advantage-based decision-making. And I think that online debate, you will see similar things, down those lanes as well.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right, my problem with opinions are extremely important, and you're right. That's mostly what we use to make decisions. I mean, I don't just make decisions every day based on peer-reviewed studies. I just kind of go with what I want to do. But when it comes to scientific facts, for example, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic of arguable, intensity, but then opinions don't matter very much when it comes to those things. It doesn't matter whether you believe in the virus or not. What matters is the scientific data and how we respond to that. And that's why this kind of, not the death of expertise, but really the kind of the shelving of expertise has really been troubling, because now we question, okay, all the doctors in the country are now conspiring against us to make us believe this thing, right? that they're telling us that it's bad and we don't believe it's bad. Therefore, they're all lying to us.
Are you reading that
I'm
book?
gonna insert in here because again, I know what you're saying and exactly what you're saying, Mark. Just people will sometimes try to buttress their position by sharing scientific journal, whatever, and says, look, this is what what the numbers say. Okay, the numbers say that. Now, what is the solution? That's usually
That's
when
very
I'm
different, right?
yeah, when I'm talking the COVID-19 with someone, yeah, it's not a question of believing in COVID-19. That sounds like a fucking religious sect. It's, do you think that the proposals to battle this are smart? Do you think that the damage done by battling it will outweigh that's the debate. The debate isn't if the virus exists or if it's a problem.
Well, to some people, though, that's still an issue for some people if they believe that it exists or that it's even as crazy as it is, especially after the CDC redid the way they're distributing their data on that, which is going to be my current event, so I'll digress.
Well, yeah, you're right. The CDC, the people, and I had a little fun with this last week on PPS, people who blindly say, believe the science, believe the science, believe the science, believe the CDC are scientists. They say some weird shit and some wrong shit. So if you're blindly just going to follow the science, I mean, you still have to think. I mean, God knows we got a brain. And if the scientists are saying something that don't quite add up, I am allowed, even though I do not have a scientific degree, I am allowed to ask questions. And particularly when dumbass politicians are trying to interpret scientific results and make sweeping policy on it, I am allowed to say, wait a damn minute, is this the best solution? And sharing a graph of the bell curve is meaningless in that regard. Is this the right solution? Is this, are these mandates that are being proposed here, there, anywhere, is that the right solution? Go ahead, Heather.
And this is how we know that 9/11 was an inside job. Go ahead.
There you go. See, it all makes perfect sense.
Well, I was going to support you because I think what he's talking about is the fact that it is advantage-based decision-making there and what the value system of all these different people are. So someone who's the breadwinner of their family and is going to be put out by a job because of COVID and their legislators are telling them, hey, you need to stay home. And also we're not going to give you as much money as you need to pay for everything, but that's going to fall on your shoulders when your credit goes bad, when you start losing things, yada, yada, the whole thing, right? So his advantage-based decision-making is going to be based off of what he believes is going to be best for his family. He's going to go out and risk himself and go to work and make his money and not lose his business. That's what he valued. And so I think you guys are all correct in attacking this in a different way, that it depends on what the person is valuing the most. So it doesn't mean any of it's wrong. It doesn't mean that COVID isn't as serious as it is. It means that that person is valuing something more for their lives for, a variety of different reasons. And we all have our variety of different reasons why we want to do what's most advantageous for us. So, and I think all of that's really conflicting.
What's the advantage for people who believe COVID is extremely serious and we should take, fairly serious precautions against it? What is there? I mean, I happen to take that position. I don't want that to be the case, right? I want COVID to be not serious. I want COVID to be over because I'm tired of wearing a mask, right? I would make more money if COVID was over, right? So what is my advantage to believing scientists are generally right?
It's just saving lives, because I feel the same way. There are a lot of things that have negatively impacted my own personal life because of COVID, which I don't talk about as much because I think people should be serious about this. But it's really, really negatively affected a lot of things. A business that I'm associated with has mostly gone under because of this, and it's a really big deal in my community. And so that was extremely sad, and I didn't want that to happen. But the advantage where I prioritize health is that, for me, I rationalize it this way. Who the fuck is going to be able to enjoy that business when we're all fucking dead and in the hospital in the first place? Which would have happened because a lot of people are high-risk groups and everything else. So, and, I have people in my family that I have to worry about. And so always for me, that's going to be my value system and my deciding factor for what I choose to do.
Okay, and I mean, that's a great, like, reason-based argument, but I think what you're kind of getting at is that what's the irrational argument? And I think that you could say that, let's pretend that you're looking at this COVID-19 thing as an opportunity, and you like think, you know what, this is just a flu, it's not really that bad. But if we pretend it's bad, if we all agree to act as though it's bad, and we hurt the economy, we can blame Trump and Orange Man bad, and that way we can win. So I mean, yeah, but I'm not kidding. Like, there are
No,
there
you're
are
exactly
people-
right. I know exactly
there
what
are
you just did. You're right.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying is that, I obviously I agree with you, or it should be obvious for those of us at home.
I'm going to
that,
destroy the biggest economy in the world because I think I will gain a slight political advantage. I mean, that's a pretty cynical approach.
There was, I don't remember what it was. There's this old 1940s movie where basically this, this guy comes in, he's taking over this local town politics, whatever, and they're like, basically like, what are you doing? Like, you're going to ruin the party. And he goes, yes, but I'll control the ruins. And, that's basically the idea is that, if you only care about power because power advantages you and your whoever you can get to come along with you, then you could look at something that is maybe, objectively and, holistically bad, but individually good. Like it helps you in your lane, even if it screws everybody else over. So there are plenty of instances like that.
As John Milton, better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that's all. But when we look at things like COVID, and you want to take a step back and say, well, objectively, scientifically, what's the truth here? There are scientific truths that I think that we could say are known and unknown, and things that we're starting to learn. But there's also broader political truths that also kind of feed into that and inform our decisions. And it's kind of hard to tell where the lines really exist, and they probably move quite a bit depending on as we learn new things and as the stakes raise. I mean, at a certain point, how many people is it okay to let die? Let's say that we were in a civil war. I mean, right now we have almost 200,000 Americans that have died from COVID. We rationally can't blame that all on Trump, but we rationally probably could blame quite a bit on Trump. But if this was an actual
those
armed
judgments every day.
Absolutely. No, and this is, I mean, we have cars which are dangerous. People die on the freeway all the time. We allow alcohol to be consumed, even though people drink too much, and bad things happen. So we absolutely do make, big boy kind of, concessions to reality, and COVID is no different. But I think that if you look at it really, really in kind of stark terms, there's a lot of people in this country that are more than happy to let hundreds of thousands of other Americans die if it gets them to win the next election. So that's probably true of either side, to be totally honest, at this point. And as the stakes raise higher and higher, I think people will be more inclined to look at these calculations, and especially if you can do it the way
government a life. Yeah, because we've given government so much power that it is for a lot of people a life or death proposition in terms of quality of life. We've given the government so much power that, it really fucking matters who wins this. Unfortunately, if we had diminished particularly executive power, then we would not have this, what I call a quadrennial revenge porn fest that we call a presidential election.
Well, when every election is the most important election of your lifetime, and it's increasingly true. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, except that it's increasingly true. Like,
They're not lying,
we're all sitting around like wondering, hey, is Ruth Bader Ginsburg going to make it another 2 months? Like, there's all kinds of stuff where it could very highly raise the stakes as far as, winning or losing an election. And increasingly, because we have so much power that's built up in this country, and we're so intent on wielding it against each other, that means that the stakes for losing are actually quite high. And it's, in just your kind of classic game theory, every time you lose, it gets worse for you. It's not like a kind of a nice tug and flow or a consensual thing, but it's increasingly getting to the point where we are winning. Like you said, it's a revenge porn thing. We're trying to get power back so we can screw over our enemies, and our ability to do so increases every year. So it's actually, it's probably contributing greatly to why our politics are so bitterly divided. It's because of the stakes are just increasingly high.
Okay.
Yeah,
Veered off
that
topic now,
and
haven't we?
because of bad debaters, people who don't know how to fucking debate.
So, can you guys hear me okay still?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I want to get into our current events. I just wanted to say one thing about the advantage stuff. There's probably no better example in modern politics of this, in my opinion, than when the left freaked out about COVID-19, I think justifiably so, and was pointing fingers at the right and calling them, what is it,
Granny killers. Granny killers.
And then all of a sudden, all of these mass protests erupt throughout the country, and everyone forgets, including a lot of experts who you see, all over. And so, like, the problem is that when people on the right see that, it's like these preconceived notions are reinforced, and so
Yeah, validates it.
right. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I know that's a controversial topic for you guys. So I think we'll wrap up that portion of the podcast and get into our current events. So who wants to go first with current events? I know you had a topic, Heather, so do you want to
I
start us
do.
out?
And I'm
Okay.
going to tie it into our topic tonight.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the straw man argument, or the straw man fallacy, logical fallacy, I guess they're called. So it's when you take what someone says or what a source is saying, and then you sort of misrepresent it. So for example, the CDC reassesses how they're distributing their information for the percentage of deaths caused by COVID. Now, this was a push by Trump and by a lot of people on the right. And so they come out and the new numbers say something like 6% of COVID deaths are due only to COVID, solely to COVID, right? So the fallacy is now only 6% of people die from COVID, which is not true. That's not at all what was said. And then, of course, they use that to justify, therefore, it's not that deadly. What it actually means is that there are deaths that are 6% that are just from COVID, but there are all these other deaths that are also from COVID that had other issues as well, likely caused by COVID, such as heart issues, pneumonia, respiratory issues. Those are all directly related to COVID. And then the other issues, which were all comorbidities and pre-existing conditions such as diabetes or cancer, where they didn't have the immune system to fight off the COVID when they had it, or the COVID exacerbated and complicated the issues that they already had. And so all of those still belong to COVID. But now this presents an issue online where they're all using it. See, I told you my conspiracy theories were true. See, I told you they were just hyping it up and it's actually nothing. See, I told you that all of these left-wing talking heads and the doctors and the Democrats are all just out to get you. It's it right here. But it's a bad argument. It's
Yeah.
not real.
Expertise. It's the death of expertise. I don't believe the doctors. I believe my interpretation as a Facebook guy of the data is correct.
Ah,
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Trump tweeted about this recently, right?
oh yes. He
Yeah.
supported this before it even came out, which I think he's got his hands in the cookie jar with the CDC. And obviously he doesn't want the World Health Organization having anything to do with the data that we get in America anymore. He just wants it to be CDC. And I personally, this is my bias and my assumption, that he has his hands in the cookie jar with the CDC and he's influencing a lot of the way the data comes out. It's true that 6% of COVID deaths are strictly from COVID. That is a true statement, but it's not the entire picture. And he knows there's
But
that stupid genius.
COVID is still the primary driver of those deaths. If
I
you
mean,
read
that's
the-
true, but his base is not going to see
No,
that,
I
and
know
he
that.
knows.
I know that.
Yeah.
I read I commented on that thread where you called
Oh,
your buddy an idiot.
oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Good
I
job.
don't think he watches our show. I keep asking him to.
Yeah, great point. Yeah. Anybody else? Chuck?
In terms of current events, I'm not going to get into it with Heather about the CDC stuff and COVID-19. It just suffice to say,
Because he
I
loves
have a
me.
I have a healthy level of skepticism about the government's interest in my well-being and generally all of our well-beings. I think I have there's enough data to support my skepticism, and I'll leave it at that. I'll get something that Nick's been pointing out over the past couple of days. They apparently let Joe Biden out of his box today to make a live appearance in Pittsburgh. Again, in terms of what he said, I think he's saying what he has to say, and quite frankly, I do think that the sudden Democratic interest in telling the rioters to stop is more or less directly tied to polling, which shows that the average Jane and Joe, particularly in these swing Rust Belt states that are so damned important, first Tuesday in November, it is the riots and for better or for worse, are polling poorly in those states. And I believe what we're seeing is a Democratic reaction to that. And that's politics. There's nothing wrong with that. It'll be interesting to see who controls the terminology and the debate on this. It's very difficult to convince people who see large buildings on fire that these are mostly peaceful. Yeah, in terms of the number of people involved, the amount of time involved, yeah, more than half of them are not setting buildings on fire. More than half of the buildings are not burning. So yeah, mostly not burning. But I'm wondering if this language is going to stick with John and Jane Doe from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. Are they going to continue to buy it when the media, and boy, it's like an obsession with some outlets, they have to put mostly peaceful in practically every headline. It'll be interesting to see if that sticks. Trump, of course, and his ilk are trying to make sure it most certainly does not. But again, it is just from a layman's point of view, it's very, I shared one last week, CNN in front of a damn towering inferno had the chyron that said mostly peaceful protest in Kenosha after, God almighty, look behind you.
The reporter was saying it as it was burning.
It was funny. I mean, it was just, it was like the Black Knight scene in the Holy Grail. I mean, it's just a flesh wound, it doesn't hurt. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see how the language wars play out over the next 76 days here.
Yeah, I think that's why it was so important that Biden said what he said. He got out in front of it 2 months ahead of time. And
now, at some point, he's going to have to answer a live question from a live reporter, because today, after his talk, they hustled him off stage very quickly, and no live answers from reporters. Even given the extenuating circumstances from COVID-19, at some point he's going to have to answer a live question.
Will he though? I mean, he's doing pretty well without answering any questions.
Oh, I know. Yeah, in some respects, I mean, just playing, let Trump be Trump and let me collect the votes is a sound strategy. But I think that's going to get you so far.
But I just want to say the irony there. Like, we wish that Trump would just stick to the teleprompter, and you're literally saying the opposite for Biden.
Exactly. Yeah, teleprompter Trump is almost palatable. Non-teleprompter Trump is not. He is.
That's when it gets good, man. That's when you got to turn it on.
I can stand a little boredom these days. I don't know about you guys.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I find Trump's approach to this whole thing to be absolutely disgusting. To be honest, point that out.
Can you imagine Obama saying, "Hey guys, I encourage you to come in from out of state and confront X, Y."
He's encouraging vigilante justice from his supporters, which are already. I mean, it's absolutely.
I mean, again, I have no fondness for the contemporary policies of the left, but fucking A, you're asking me to vote for this jackass? Oh, no.
Chuck, can I ask you something? Can I ask you something? So, as a supporter of the Second Amendment right, I'm always being told that, militias are formed and they're sort of a right of the American people under the Second Amendment guise, that it's allowed to be formed in case of a tyrannical government. Is that true?
That's one of the underlying reasons behind the Second Amendment. Basically, the Second Amendment, again, my opinion, was written to make sure that government did not have a monopoly on force, on weaponry.
So then why are these 2A supporters going in support of the government with their guns as opposed to forming just in case that government forms as tyranny? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they're there to support the tyrannical government as opposed to being the usurpers against the tyrannical government, which is what they claim to want to support all this time. And then boom, all of a sudden, we're all about supporting the government.
Well, right now, you were equating government with Trump. They support Trump, and Trump is the one they're fighting
basically.
for. Yeah, exactly, fighting for their king. And if the king is deposed January 20th next year, then all of a sudden the Second Amendment, to them at least, will come to mean, yeah, we're taking up arms against a tyrannical government. The Second Amendment, in my opinion, its original purpose was to make sure that, again, government did not have a monopoly on force, where the citizenry could serve as at least an effective check against a government that would...
A check on the government, not a check on the people. Instead, there being a check on the people and aligning with the government.
That's because
like,
their boy is in the White House. Yeah, I know what you're saying now.
Yeah, on your face. I know you see my point.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's a fantastic point. I think it's great, especially coming from the people with their "Don't tread on me" bumper stickers that I see everywhere. I think
they're loving the government these days, aren't they? Because to them, Trump is the government.
Real.
Yeah,
I think the foundation of that is a lot more pernicious than just he's my guy, he's so I'm going to support him. And I've argued a bit with Nick about this. I think it is largely, not entirely, but largely driven by ethnic identity and white nationalism.
You know what? That's great, because Art really agrees with you about this.
Yeah. I think that's yeah, I'm sure. I think that they see themselves in a certain way, and part of that way is obviously against the libs, but they're taking a position against people of color, not explicitly, right? They don't say I hate black people, but they always seem to end up on the opposite side, and they have their self-image includes guns and trucks and Jesus and NASCAR and Mountain Dew and whatever else.
Mountain Dew and trucks are very racist. So
yes.
I mean,
I have a truck.
That's part of their. That's part of their identity, and that it's not necessarily bad that every part of your ethnic identity. Yeah. I have an ethnic identity. I'm pretty super white, right? But if
the whitest
part of their identity is this white nationalism for them, and that drives a lot of, in my opinion, their politics. And that's why they're showing up with guns to confront these, horrible looters, which there definitely are looters, but adding, a bunch of dumb white guys with guns doesn't really fix that situation. But they see themselves as that is my identity, and I should go, support the army.
You know what's interesting about this situation is a lot of the looters and rioters these days seem to be white.
They're white.
Yeah, they are, but nobody.
It's like white people fighting against white people over something that has to do with black people. I don't know.
But if you ask the prepubescent shooter, do you think he would see it that way? That if you said, "Hey, what do you think most of the looters look like?" Do you think he's going to say?
I personally think it's more ideological and cultural than I do race. And there's race is mixed in there, but I think that for them, look, I think white nationalism is a problem on the right. I don't deny that. I think anybody who has a brain has to acknowledge that. I think my disagreement with Art is to what extent it is, and whether or not we should be attributing all of these various things to racism. And I think it's problematic in just generally, but I think as an argument, it's really problematic because it's so hard to prove.
I think
And
it's very
so-
problematic because it's so old. This is the exact same shit we heard about the Tea Party when they formed in 2008. This largely a white superiority movement. They hate blacks. They don't come out and say it, but they hate. It's the same shit we were hearing then. I reject the argument that race is a primary driver of this.
Well, but then but the statistics would say otherwise, right? If you have everybody who believes in this thing are 99.5% of a particular ethnic background, it's hard to say that that plays no factor.
No, I didn't say it played no factor. You said it would play the primary factor, and I'm saying it does not. 99.5% of NASCAR fans are white. That does not mean NASCAR is a white nationalist venture.
Yeah, so I think that's a fallacious argument, and I'm not trying to be funny,
is.
but
It is.
yeah, I think that saying, well, 98% of the Republican Party being white means that they're automatically motivated by race. That's
certainly
you
not.
might not be saying that, and maybe I'm
No.
straw manning your
No,
argument.
but I think it's at that
Fallacy against your fallacy. Who wins?
I think it's at that point you at least ask the question that if they're not, white nationalists, and that doesn't necessarily mean every position they take is racist, right? Some of them are nationalist, right? I mean, there's two parts to that. But if they're all white, you have to at least ask, okay, is there a reason why other ethnic groups aren't being included? Now, some are,
That
right?
question is totally legitimate, and I get it. I just think that you need to start somewhere else. Like, I think it's a legitimate argument to say why to ask the question is why the right is so anti-immigrant, right? Why there's such a passion there, right? So you can point that, and you can point to that specifically and say, is that racism, right? I just don't think just being white or having a white nationalist, group within your base is evidence that your entire party is been corrupted.
That's
by
correct. That's
Nazis.
correct. And that's called a false dilemma. And it's the same argument that they have against us with the people out there who are peaceful protesting, and they want to say that everybody's rioting, everybody's looting. It's the same argument on both
False
sides.
dilemma.
You can't do that.
Another thing is, I think we're losing the language a little bit. White nationalist, with just another term we're throwing around like a nickel of these days. To me, white nationalist is, a Nazi skinhead curb stomping every ethnic minority he sees while going on a rampage. It's a very bad thing.
And
I think we've
Yeah.
overused
But
the
that's
term
not-
to
but
the
that's
point
not the
where it's
definition, right?
ubiquitous now.
The definition is not just Nazis.
Well, I know that, but I mean, white nationalism is bad. It's just very bad, and I don't know how to define it other than to use stereotypes. But when I think white nationalist, I think of some tattooed Aryan soldier who is ready to beat the shit out of anybody slightly sharp.
This is another
into that.
problem with that conversation, because the term white nationalist has definitely become more broad on the left and sort of narrowed more on the right. And so the left calls white supremacy and white nationalism a systemic thing, and that we're all contributing to all the time, especially if we support or don't support a specific policy. And what that does is it sort of just identifies millions of more people in this, category that prior to this was like evil. So now it's like you're taking this narrow category of people who were skinheads, explicitly overt racists, and you're expanding it to tens of millions of people and saying, well, if you hold this belief, you're just as bad as them. And even if you're not saying that, when you use that terminology, that's what it says. And my problem with that isn't necessarily that there isn't a point in there, because I think there is. My problem with that is it ends the conversation, and it alienates even more people, than we're already alienated. And people are like, well, if you're going to call me racist and you're going to say that my beliefs and my culture and all of this stuff are, inherently racist, then fuck you. Then I'm going to go listen to this guy on YouTube. And, I do think that's an element.
And be more white nationalist. Like you pushed me into being more white nationalist by calling me a white nationalist.
You are
Yeah,
a white nationalist. I'm convinced of it.
So, Nick, I think you're right. I think you're right that the definition has broadened somewhat because I think we're recognizing garden variety racism. And it's not as virile. I mean, not everybody is Mengele, okay? But I think there are a good number of otherwise fairly decent people who really think the other is a problem, right?
I agree with that.
It was better when he was whiter.
Right.
I think that's a big, big group.
And I think that's true. I think we can address it differently. And I don't think that necessarily, I think that they're sort of recognizing it like that. I don't think they acknowledge it though, but I just think that we can address it in a different way.
So I need a new term, is what you're telling me.
Well, we should just use Nazi, because I'm going to tell you right now, Nazi is not the way to go.
All right. Even if they're
So-
Illinois Nazis?
If they're actually Nazis, then sure, you can call them Nazis.
Well, there are good people in that group, I'm sure. You know, on both sides.
Very, very fine people on both sides.
On both sides.
And I argue often that there is no way in that particular scenario, even if there were people in there who didn't identify as Nazis, that there were good people marching with 150 Nazis, because you're not a good person if you're marching with those. But anyway.
Yeah. So that for me is the actual problem of it, is that if there's elements of white nationalism or Nazis who like your party, they like your party because there's policies in there that they can use to manipulate or justify their racist ideology. So that's an actual fact. So when you're speaking to someone and you want to talk about, say, immigration, but someone's not necessarily racist because they think we should have a strong border patrol. We just want to protect our nation, keep our jobs here, keep everybody here, the wealth here, the money's not trickling into Mexico or wherever else it's going to go, right?
That's right.
So there's a really good argument that they can make, but you're right, they close their ears, they shut down, it becomes a moot point once you start saying that, hey, the immigration policy that you support is a racist position because it enables these racists to get away with keeping people of color out.
Legitimate. Being an immigration restrictionist is not inherently racist.
That's correct.
People who are racist and xenophobic support those
support that. Yes.
and use those arguments. So it's hard to disentangle. And that's why we need to be careful about how we sort of use that label, because when we use it in the wrong way, that's when it becomes problematic.
So
That's right.
Can you
Just
maybe
like
differentiate-
everyone-
Can you
just
maybe
like everyone on-
differentiate- I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark. No, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Can you maybe differentiate them by who thinks that only the Mexico border should be strongly controlled and not the Canadian border? Would that maybe be a tip-off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, 100%. But in order to get that, you would have to get people to contextualize their argument. And not all people are able to articulate themselves that well. So even if they do have, oh, Art, your face is like ready to explode right now.
I mean, do you
No,
really need to be able to
watched-
contextualize and like articulate racism to be racist?
Oh, stop it. Yes, yes, you do. Well, listen, I think what you can do is you can, if you have a conversation with somebody who is motivated by racial animus or hostility, that you can certainly tell, as opposed to somebody who has legitimate concerns about the level of immigration and then that how that will affect the economy and jobs and their family and other things. It's hard to disentangle, and it's hard, but I think that we run into a major problem. And this is what I was saying about hard to prove. I don't include it in arguments anymore because I don't think you can definitively prove racism unless there is racism. You have to see it. And when you try to do it, you end up like way over here. And the persuadable people, the people that Art wants to read his threads, are like, what the fuck are they talking about? They started here, and now 12 degrees of separation. I'm over here, and this is me. Now I'm racist, right?
All right. So yeah. All right. So let me just jump in to kind of work with your point here. So just to pull up a quick definition from Wikipedia, because I'm just going to go for the, the obvious. I mean,
Wikipedia is the best.
So Well, people, complain about it because we used to complain 20 years ago that, it was not resource or, sourced. And now that there's plenty of, notations
That's
to look
true.
at,
You're right.
you can look at all of this.
Yeah.
So white nationalism is a type of nationalism which espouses a belief that white people are a race and seeks to develop and maintain a white racial and national identity. White nationalists say that they seek to ensure the survival of the white race and the cultures of historically white states. They hold that white people should maintain their majority in majority white countries, maintain their political and economic dominance, and that their culture should be foremost. That's
their
pretty
culture
fucking
should
common
not
in
be
America.
foremost.
I mean, I'm sorry, but most people that are voting Republican basically believe that.
But you're doing the same thing. That was their culture. They just happen to be white. It's not abnormal for a group of people to want to protect their culture historically. And so like you're taking that definition and applying it to these people specifically for that reason. What I'm saying is just because they want to protect their culture and they happen to be white doesn't make them racist or white nationalist.
White is
No.
not a culture.
You're
I'm not saying
reading
white
way
is a
too
culture.
far.
I'm saying the people who have the culture. This culture has to do with being white because it was white people who developed the culture. That doesn't.
But
make
that's not what American culture is supposed to be.
What does
That's
that
right.
even mean though?
Because
No, I
American
mean,
culture is supposed to be the big melting pot. It's not supposed
Exactly.
to be.
That's supposed to be our culture. We're supposed to be the melting pot. That's American culture.
I think it's,
So
How would you even define white culture? The heavy use of
I'm
mayonnaise?
not defining white culture. I'm trying the heavy use of mayonnaise.
Italian, baby.
Hey,
Hey.
well,
Western civilization, perhaps.
Yeah, Western
so
civilization.
I'm not trying to define white culture. I'm just responding to what he's saying. I'm saying
Okay.
the culture in the United States that's existed for a long time, and that it's there are huge segments of the country that happen to be white, and there's lots of reasons for that. But my point is it's not unreasonable for a group of people to want to protect certain aspects of their culture. Now, if those aspects of their culture are racist, then yes, absolutely, I feel you. But if those aspects of their culture are libertarian, right, in origin, right, and to some extent, right, because I think that's a lot of people. That's not racist. That's an ideology, and that's a culture. And I think that we need to be careful about how we apply these terms, because racism and white nationalism are the same, right? In order to be a white nationalist, you also have to be racist.
Not necessarily. You really don't. You just have to think that white people should have their own space, like Japan should have its own space.
Racism is about racial superiority, and racism is
No, not necessarily. It just
Well,
means
that's
that you
the
want your people to have a
dictionary
space. It doesn't mean that you're like some genetic Superman. I mean, there are Nazi elements that would believe that, but like that doesn't necessarily mean that just because like India should have Indian people that are Hindu and whatnot, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like the master race.
and this is where
It just
we
means
get
they want their own space.
Then this is where we get into a disagreement, or not necessarily a disagreement, because I'm sure I agree with you about a lot of this. But I think that it's helpful to define these terms, and I think the differing definitions get us in these places where we start arguing over who believes what is what. But just generally, when people hear the term white nationalist, they think you're calling them a racist, and justifiably so, right? Because it's always been associated with racism, and I just think it's if we want to identify problems of race and we want to somehow get it out of our society, or at least minimize it or reduce it as to being as least of part of our society as possible, then we need to address it in a way where people are going to listen to us, or where they're able to recognize it or willing to recognize it. And we don't do that by saying, you're racist, you're racist, you're racist. We do it in other ways, by trying to get them to listen, by through reason, right? And
So if we have somebody who's running the country that says that we don't want immigrants from these shithole countries in Africa or Haiti, we would like them from like Northern Europe. How is that? I mean, that's both white nationalist and racist. There's probably a non-racist way of making that argument in theory, but in practice, it always seems to work out to be pretty
I
ethically.
agree that that stuff like that is definitely, there's some racism in there, right? Somewhere, one way or another, you're going to find some. I don't disagree with that. And I mean, I think that Trump generally, right, like he certainly represents some deep racism in this country, right? And I don't disagree. I think that my disagreement has to do with the approach and the extent of how big.
Here's the thing: white people don't often consider this idea that we actually are a nation of immigrants, and that doesn't necessarily mean immigrants from Europe. Like, it actually means that we are supposed to have this kind of overall culture that doesn't necessarily matter where you feed it from, be it Mexico or Africa or Asia or Europe. In theory, it's supposed to be a melting pot of different cultures, and kind of proof that it doesn't matter where you're from, it kind of matters what you believe. If you can't separate that ethnicity, this idea that only works if you have mostly white people, like, there's a lot of people who probably vote Republican that think that if there was some plague and all the white people died.
I think if people feel like that, that's racism. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the idea that people feel like that. Like,
okay,
I don't necessarily think.
Let me just finish real quick. So let's say that all the white people died in America. There's a plague. COVID-21 comes out, kills all the white people.
You would be so happy.
So I would actually be a little bummed myself, but
As a white,
you know,
That
but
would be good.
because I have no immunity to such a disease. But my point is that there's a lot of people who would look at that and say, well, it wouldn't really be America at that point. You know, if it's no longer a majority American, if there's no white people left, it would be something else. It would be like America before the white people got here, or something like it. To them, they associate America as this kind of 1950s, picket white fence, American flag in the breeze sort of a thing, where the patriarchy was in charge and gay people in their closet. Like, they kind of have this idea of the good old days where that's kind of America, love it or leave it. And anything that deviates from that, like, the further we get from that, the more people want MAGA. They want to make America great again. They kind of want to reclaim what we had. And there's no way of getting around the fact that has very severe racial overtones.
But my point is if their motivations are racial or sexual orientation or something like that in nature, then you're right. It's discrimination or it's racism. It has to
That's
be.
all.
I just don't think that I think that the culture that I'm talking about isn't necessary. I think you attribute more of those things to that culture than I do. And this is actually a great question for Chuck, because Chuck is from the South. I feel like a lot of this culture that we're talking about is there, right, Chuck? So, in your opinion, is art right? Is it that bad? And
Impossible to say. Again, I can't speak for the 50 million people that live in what we call the American South, nor would I presume to. My issue with this is the assumption that the primary mover behind Trump is racially based. I reject that, even if people are not aware of that. We're talking about American culture. American culture is what we're doing right now. We're debating, we're talking. No one's going to come through the fucking door and put us in jail or do anything to us for the words we say. American culture is the primacy of the Constitution. It is the belief that there's no such thing as a king or queen. It is the individual that is revered as in a collective sense, if that makes sense. It is the primacy of the Constitution, and that is American culture. 10 million years from now, when aliens are looking over the remnants of Earth, the only significant thing about America they will take away with them is the Constitution and the idea behind that, in my opinion. And if we want to glom on to something that defines American culture, that to me would be the best thing to do. And when I think about America, I think about that wonderful document, first and foremost, that tells me that I can say what I want to within reason. No one's going to arrest me. No one's going to accost me, not the government anyway. And that I will never have to bend my knee to a king or queen as long as I live here.
Can I ask you, how many people do you think that support Trump in sort of this reluctant way because they feel the same way as you, and they're afraid
There
that
are
the
quite
left is
I-
going to take those things away.
I would say of my friends who profess to vote for Trump, 90% are not fond of him personally. They don't like the tweets. They don't like the bullshit that he foments, but they don't like the alternative more.
They're terrified of it
Yes.
because they have this view, and whether it's real or not real, it's their view that that culture that you're talking about,
Real or not,
is going to be taken away. So
there's going to be a lot of people who do look at the government as a de facto king or queen who will be calling the shots, and that to them is not palatable. Now, for me, holding Trump in the disdain that I do, it's still not enough to get me to pull the lever for him. But I understand. There's a lot of people who might have a personal distaste for Trump who are quite literally going to vote for him because he is the lesser of two evils.
right. And I really think
Quaint though that may be.
we underestimate the number of people out there who are kind of like,
And
yeah, he's a dick.
yeah,
He does awful things, but he's better than the alternative. And
Right.
that's why
yeah,
the
and
stuff with
quite
Antifa
frankly,
and all that
a
other
lot
kind
of
of
the
stuff is so bad.
and a lot of the people have been called racist and white nationalists for doing nothing other than offering policy disagreements for the past several years. You get a little pissed off after a while if you say, well, I disagree with President Obama's policy here. Oh, that's just because you're a racist. Fuck you. And after a while, you just get pissed off and you close your ears up and you're just not going to listen to them anymore and fuck them.
And right. And I just, it shuts down conversation. What were you going to say?
It's not meant to advance a conversation. It's meant to end a conversation, and it's meant to tell you to shut the fuck up. No,
It's a
and I don't do
fallacy.
that very well.
It's a
Yeah,
fallacy.
it is. It's a fallacy. Yes, it is.
Nope.
That's a fallacy.
Okay, now sometimes it's a fallacy, and sometimes you have an organization, let's say like the Oath Keepers, which was formed on March of 2009. I'm not sure what changed in 2009, but apparently we needed an Oath Keepers then. And so what they basically are is a kind of a subculture within police and military that exists to be a counterweight against the oppressive government should it ever start hammering on the people. So what changed is that it was a kind of a subculture thing for a while. Curiously, now that something I guess has changed in our system of government, and now the Oath Keepers support the police and military violently suppressing some of these people out in the streets. So who's to say really what changed? Huh?
Yeah. Wonder why that is. First of all, for some reason, I thought the Oath Keepers were those weird guys that took their daughters to prom. Is that a different thing?
I think that's something similar. I think that's Promise Keepers. Yeah, that's
Promise
a
Keepers. Yeah.
But anyway,
offshoot maybe. This is a kind of weird edgy cousin of that, but yeah.
But that's
why
ideology.
did they change? Why did they?
Necessarily race. It's just a common hypocrisy is all over the place, and it
So
happens on the left and it happens on the right. And just because it happens, and just because the president was black, doesn't necessarily mean.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He was black. Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily. mean,
I know what you're doing, Art, and I reject that too.
I
The fact of the
reject it.
matter is that in 2009, you had a president elected who, for better or for worse, was seen as very, very far left, and someone who clearly favored government control over individual assertion, someone who favored the collective more so than the individual. And yes, I don't doubt that for some of them, his race was a driving factor behind this. But for a lot of people, the fact that someone that they viewed as very far left and someone who had no qualms about exercising the power of the federal government forced them to go into Oath Keepers mode. Now, yes, when Trump was elected, they showed their true colors by all of a sudden becoming government dick-sucking patriots. And they let us know exactly what they were then. But again, I'm just growing tired of the thought that if anyone has any disagreements with a certain politician, they are racist. And I just get sick of hearing that because
Okay.
Go ahead, Rock. Go ahead.
I'm gonna
I'm sorry,
interrupt
Heather.
you. I'm so sorry.
Adam.
So it feels the same way being on the left when everything that we say or do is communism, it's socialism, and it's all going to lead us back to, you know, this authoritative control because that's what the left does. And so that's what they're fucking afraid of. They're afraid that we're all going to turn this nation into communism. They were afraid Obama was going to do it. I fail to see where the Islamic State was actually implemented and we've become this communist country under Obama. If anything, and this is what's so ridiculous about this argument, Obama was not that far fucking left. People like me are far fucking left and criticized him for not being progressive enough with many of his policies. Thank you, Nick, for being the moderate here. I wish to God that during 2016, it was not this double harping from the alt-right and from all of our centrists and moderates calling all of us socialists and you're terrible fucking people and socialism is never gonna fucking work. Because that's what it felt like, being called fucking Nazis all the time, when it's not true. Even the stuff that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren were proposing were not flat out socialism. They were socialist policies, but it does not make our country socialist.
So
it makes
can
us a
I-
capitalist
first of all-
society with socialist programs.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You can't say because we have AOC or Ilhan Omar or Bernie Sanders backing Joe Biden on some of his policies that Joe Biden's going to come in here and be this communist, socialist, dictator, authoritative figure. It's utterly ridiculous. All right.
No, I don't think the argument about Joe Biden works very well. I don't think it's very persuasive.
It doesn't. And they can't figure out what to do with them because of it.
Well, they were prepared for Bernie or something.
Yeah.
So you meant, Chuck, you mentioned Obama and how, you know, he was definitely opposed by the right, probably more virulently even than Clinton, who was impeached by them, right? I mean,
I think that's a matter of time because as we've become more polarized over the years, Trump is more despised than Bush.
But let's think about the most racist attack that was leveled on Obama. I don't think you can argue that the birther movement is anything other than racially motivated, right? I mean, can we agree on that?
Sure.
There were, at the time that he was in office, 70% of Republicans believed there was some doubt about his birth. So that doesn't necessarily make them racist. 70% of Republicans, not of white people.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But that doesn't necessarily make them
It's
racist.
mostly white people.
But it smells a little bit racist, right? I mean, you got to think.
But Mark, that's
The
the
most
same thing with
frustrating
the
thing about
immigration,
that was
just
he could
because
have
they
ended that
supported
in a
it.
second, and he didn't. I mean, that was very
Because
frustrating.
that sets a
from-
really bad precedent to, you know, respond to every crazy theory that is put forward,
Sure.
right?
But the right believes in crazy conspiracy theories, whether it's against a white person or a black person. They believed that Hillary Clinton had a sex ring, and then there was a high percentage of it.
Babies.
But I don't think the majority of conservatives necessarily are more predisposed to paranoid conspiracy theories. I think that's, you know, somewhat balanced.
I think
views on
it's
both ends.
increased. And I think that it's made worse because of like right-wing media and stuff. And at the time, there was a lot of right-wing media pushing the birther conspiracy theory. So I just want to throw that out there. I think you're right that theory is motivated by racism to some extent, but I don't think that 70% necessarily were doing it because they're racist. I think they were doing it because they're impressionable. And I think the proof that they're impressionable is very evident, right? And who
Well,
they
I mean, John McCain was legitimately born outside the country, but they didn't get up in arms about that, right?
They did it to Ted Cruz. Trump did it to Ted Cruz.
Did that get any traction on the right? No, none.
No, but he was on the right. So
Wow.
it was, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Trump doesn't discriminate. He does shitty lying-based attacks on everybody. I understand that, right? But
and that's another thing. Like,
birtherism and any traction at all is a pretty bad indicator of, you know, where
but if
racism.
whoever is the Democratic nominee, whoever the Republicans are against, there's going to be some sort of conspiracy theory leveled against them. And there's going to be a huge portion of the Republican Party that buys into that conspiracy theory. That's what their tactics are. And some of that stuff in origin is racially motivated, and it sounds like this one was. But I don't think that you can necessarily say that purely based on the fact that lots of people were like, oh, that sounds right. is because they had they were, you know, racist necessarily. I'm sure a lot of them were, but
They're predisposed, I think, to believe it of Obama where they wouldn't be of a white candidate.
well, sure. I mean, it's going to be harder to prove that Bill Clinton was born in Africa.
Oh, but he could have been born in England, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure. Yeah, that's
Probably
true.
wouldn't have
No,
cared
that's-
then.
I think that's a good point.
and how much traction do you think that theory would get? I mean, he definitely spent time in England, right?
I think it could get traction. I don't think it would get as much. I think people are ridiculous nowadays. But I agree with you. The fact that he was from Kenya, the fact that he was black, all of that stuff, I think it made it more persuasive to people, and that in itself had some racism to it.
Well, he had family in Kenya, yes or no?
Oh, yeah, he
Did he not
definitely
have
had,
family?
his father was from Kenya.
Okay. Yeah.
And was Muslim, I believe.
Right.
But
Yeah.
he was raised in Hawaii.
Right.
Born there.
Obama was not from
Born-
Kenya.
He was not from Kenya. That's right.
He was
See,
born-
that's how bad disinformation is, because even those of us trying to remember the facts when we never believed the conspiracy to begin with,
Right.
it clouds it all for people. And so instead of saying that 70% of people believed in the birther movement, therefore they are racist, which is a fallacy, right?
Not necessarily. I just think it indicates.
What it is it's just disinformation being seeded to people and them not having any other wherewithal to know how to get the true context of what the claim was or how to get the answer for that, or because they were already predisposed to a bias against a Democrat, or because of who Obama was in particular, for whatever reason, those biases led them to, oh yeah, that sounds like it could possibly be true. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was a racist motive.
And
Those
I-
are all possible explanations, but
I-
are they the most likely?
So
I mean, that's true, but that doesn't matter to them. They're going to allow that to justify their belief in the birther movement. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, I'm a racist, therefore I believe this.
Oh, I
Like,
don't
even
think
if
White nationalism exists on a spectrum.
Right.
Sure.
It
And this
does.
is the
There are
problem with
there are some
white
people who are very explicit about it, and there are some people who are not. I mean, it might just be a
I mean,
very
where
subtle.
are you on the spectrum of white nationalism? Are you here or are you over here? Like,
Well, no, I mean, and
The
you know,
part
just
that-
to be totally serious about it, let's say, you know, like we were saying before, Japanese nationalism. Is it okay that Japan is a nation full of Japanese people? Like, do they have the right to maintain that? This is an argument that white nationalists will make about America, is that it was founded by what they call European stock. And because of that, it has a certain heritage and history that it's not wrong for people who want
but
to.
this is the problem I have with this argument. The 12 degrees of racism is that you start here with a premise and you end up over here and you say, like you did with me one time, right? We got into it and whatever. But I personally, for personal reasons, believe that self-determination is a very important part of individual progress and stuff like that. And I think that you can expand that argument, and I think people have for hundreds of years, right?
And I agree.
Right. I know, and that's why it's racist. But the point is that, right, I know where you're going with it. But the point is that self-determination is a thing, right? That there's a philosophical foundation to it. It's reasonable to argue that if you instill values into an individual, that they will be able to, in certain situations, not in all situations, cope and manage with stress more effectively, stuff like that. This is like a psychological fact. You want to talk about facts and science and psychology, right? That's facts and science and psychology, right? That you can learn in a university. And so just believing in that, right, and applying that to some extent, even if it's a mild extent, you would, and you'll argue this right now, I know you will, and that's fine, but you will say there is, you know, somewhere in that is my white nationalism, or is me sort of kind of jumping on this white nationalist train. And it's like, even if that is true, and I think you have to do a lot of twisting yourself into pretzels to figure it out, it's so counterproductive and it's so unnecessary to even say. And like, you can make the point like, hey, this is an argument that's been made before, and I feel like in our society, you know, it kind of reinforces this part, right? And that would be how you would contextualize it. But But when you start saying you're white nationalist, or you're presenting yourself, or you're showing your white nationalism, or whatever the fuck people say, right? Then it gets problematic.
Okay, and just to clarify, while I agree with this as a point of self-actualization, is that yes, you do need to have agency. You do need to have, you need to look inward for your own solutions. So that by itself is correct in any way you want to slice it, except when you use it as a political argument for people. And I'm just going to introduce a little-known philosopher from the mid-20th century, which you may or may not have heard of, Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King.
Oh, I have
And
a video.
what
Of
he
Here we go.
do you? Okay, so what he once said is that, and when white Americans tell Black Americans to lift himself up by his bootstraps, they don't look over they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
I agree
And that's
with
all.
that. I agree with you.
Okay.
I don't,
But people that make this argument
Mark,
often don't.
also-
And this is my point,
also-
is that if you have people who have no resources and then you tell them to lift themselves up, then naturally, and especially when you're systematically ensuring that they don't have equal access to resources, then it becomes a tool of white nationalism.
But
And that was
that's
all that I was saying.
wrong. You're misconstruing my position. I agree with you. If you stand outside and you tell a group of people, you're this way because you didn't lift yourself out of your bootstraps, and that's what you need to do. That's different than saying you should try to be the best you can be at anything.
Be
My
best.
position, and Martin Luther King was a very, very adamant advocate of that type of self-empowerment. That's why the street sweeper speech that I'm sure you guys have all heard of, and if you haven't, I can
No, it's
promise you that I will
beautiful.
post it later, and I will
Yep.
quote it 17 times on PPS and in 37 other groups, right? Where he talked about being the best person that you can possibly be. Your life's blueprint. It's an entire speech by Martin Luther King. Every single speech that he ever made, every single interview that he ever was in, he emphasized self-determination. And that's why he was such a powerful leader, because he didn't say, you're a bunch of victims that can't help your situation and you should, cry yourself to sleep and crawl up into some sort of fucking, whatever it's called, the fucking
Fetal position.
fetal position, right? He said, you are great people and you have the ability to do things. And all I'm saying is, not that society doesn't oppress African Americans or lots of other people. American society definitely does, and it has. And not that pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it's not as simple as that. And not that it's extremely condescending, come from Nick from Hope Valley, Rhode Island, in this rural town, right? Telling a Black person, pull yourself up from your bootstraps. But that in any situation where you have generational poverty and you have lots and lots of crime and lots of bad stuff going on, that teaching self-empowerment is a good thing, and that we should do it on a community level. But you can still insert that into politics without you being inherently racist. In fact, the opposite is true. My motivations are coming from a place where I want everybody to be on equal footing, right? That's why I'm saying it, not because I think that, because I want to oppress them. Mark, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Is this a bad time to point out that it's physically impossible to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and it actually used to mean an impossible thing, and somehow it became American help yourself out. But no, I mean,
whoa, he did say that.
Yeah. And I think it's because they're afraid to water down their message at all. People are afraid of nuance, right? Because they don't want to give an inch to the other side who they see as truly evil, right? They're afraid if they say, and honestly, Joe Biden, to his credit, right? It's not exactly profiling courage, but he did denounce, violence in all forms, with the protests and everything. And it's hard for those who are in that position to do that without feeling like they're giving ground. And they don't want to give ground because they believe they are 100% truly right. And they really, in the end of the day, they're right. They're being, unfairly treated by the police. They are, subject to, widespread racism, et cetera. So they don't want to give that ground and say, guys, let's protest, but all these things we did over here were wrong. And they're clearly, those things happened. They were wrong people on both sides, but they're trying to not lose the purity of their position. They don't want to give that ground to give the other side something to sink their teeth into.
I agree with that. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
So the reason that I keep bringing this up is that it's one of those things that's true out of context. It's like giving nutrition tips to a starving man.
Right.
What I'm saying is that you can give somebody good advice that doesn't fucking help them. And if you don't have the right resources and ecosystem environment for people to thrive in, and then you tell them, oh, but if you did, you'd also want to make sure that you had a lot of this other stuff going on. Yeah, I mean, in principle, of course you want to have a nice balanced meal. Okay, great. Good fucking point. But when you don't set people up for success and you're like, well, you're not really going to have a great life, but just try to sweep the street really, really well and just be the best street sweeper you can. In isolation, without looking at the whole context, that's just a way of telling them to go fuck themselves and that they deserve to be poor. And that's why I think if you look at MLK in context, you get the whole picture rather than just try to like isolate out, one aspect of it that kind of backs up your case. And white nationalists do this. This is a thing that people do and say, oh, well, black people just have this victim mentality. And if only they were just, got up a little earlier, worked a little harder, maybe, had more fathers in their lives. And they'll run through this list of things where it's just like, ultimately it's just down to the fact that you made bad life decisions and you deserve to be poor, rather than looking at the whole system that we built for ourselves that we didn't really let them in on until very recently. And now we're wondering why they don't have great results and they don't have generational wealth like we do.
I think the way that the alt-right and white nationalist organizations gain followers is by making arguments that appeal to people. And they're certainly not going to make arguments that sound hateful because they're not going to be able to recruit anybody. So they're going to take reasoned arguments and then they're going to try to persuade people with those reasoned arguments. So the origin of the argument may be reasonable. Just because a white nationalist does that doesn't make every piece of that argument irrational or unreasonable. And
absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Okay. And so with Martin Luther King, when he said that, I've listened to every speech he has, like in context, for hours. I'm weird. Like I go way overboard with this stuff. I really enjoy listening to what he says. And I'm telling you right now that the context of it is what it is. It's not any different. And he would be the first person to be like, no, I want them to believe in themselves. I am trying to inspire people who don't have any other inspiration in their lives to do better and to tell them that they have that capacity, because he believed that that one of the reasons that people stay down is because they feel like they're inferior. And he wanted to eliminate that psychology. You are not inferior. And that is the message that he repeatedly gave to them. And so to the idea that this is just condescending, right? And that we shouldn't do it because it's just, maybe for me it's condescending because who the fuck am I? But not from him. I mean, he's a community leader, right? African-American leader. That's what I'm saying. Like, and he did inspire people for decades. He lasting change in every aspect of our society and culture can in some way rooted in the movement that he led. And a lot of the speeches still that he made, not just the I Have a Dream speech, but the Mountaintop speech, the Blueprint speech, still resonate today in every aspect of our culture. And it's the one thing that almost everybody who has, is reasonably good person can listen to and unite behind, right? It's this idea that we're in this together. And that's what he represented. And so there I go again.
But isn't that's just half of his solution, right?
That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Determination, do your best. But the other half was racial justice, because he knew that was essential. And the right likes to make the argument of just one half of that, right?
Correct.
All you try to do is pull yourself up by your bootstraps and defy gravity. But They want it. They don't care if it's coupled with racial justice. In fact, they rather it wasn't. So they just
100%. I 150% agree with you there.
and
All right,
they'll
sounds like
they'll point to people who became Wall Street bankers, out of the ghetto, right?
Yep.
But that's like the 0.01% of humans who are capable of doing that. That guy was going to be successful no matter what, but most people can't be that guy. And the statistics show that if you're in those conditions and you're subject to those social pressures and systemic racism, you are not going to achieve at the same level as someone who is raised in the racial and cultural minority. And when you get a resume with, John Smith on it, rather than a more African-American sounding name, they're going to get the look, et cetera. So it has to be both sides of that, not just.
Right. And I think
yourself up.
this is what a good discussion looks like. If we could have discussions like this, because if this was a discussion on Facebook right now, 3 of you would have been blocked by Chuck. I would have kicked you all out of like 2.5 of my groups, right? Probably blocked you on my friends list. And the only person I would be talking to is Heather, right?
Yeah. But you know why that is? Anonymity.
That's right.
And in Facebook, we're just a picture and some text. But we're talking to each other now, so we would feel bad saying, bad things about Nick to his face.
Oh no, I do it all the time.
Don't feel bad about saying bad stuff to my face.
But that's what it is. It's the impersonal nature of the internet, and that kind of depersonalized persona that we adopt when we're online.
I think that's an indisputable point. Heather, you have the last word. Heather's going to fall asleep in her chair.
No, I'm just going to say that in the comment section, once you get this posted and I have some time tonight, because I still have to make dinner and go grocery shopping,
Okay.
I'm going to post the 15 fallacies, and I'm going to use things that I've heard from the shift and things that I've heard Trump use, which are all fucking fallacies. And I'm just going to put those in the comment section because I think that's important for Facebook debating and Twitter debating and all the online crap.
Okay. So one last thing before we go, and then we will be out.
Rewind.
Now what I'm saying is this. I would like for all of us to believe in nonviolence, but I'm here to say tonight that if every Negro in the United States turns against nonviolence, I'm going to stand up as a lone voice and say this is the wrong way.
Wow. What a great word.
I will never change in my basic idea that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for freedom and justice. I think for the Negro to turn to violence would be both impractical and immoral.